The reception atrium stretched 3 stories high, its curved walls a seamless expanse of matte slate with subtle linear patterns that seemed to shift as Ray walked beneath the frosted light panels. The glow was soft, almost clinical, casting everything in a pale blue-white that made the space feel like the inside of a very polite glacier. Low geometric benches lined the perimeter, and across the polished floor, various alien figures moved with purpose, some carrying equipment modules, others consulting handheld devices, all of them pointedly not making eye contact with the human woman in the leather jacket. Ray adjusted the collar of her burgundy shirt and glanced at her watch. Right on time. The message had been clear enough. Report to the Interspecies Assessment Institute for a routine biological survey. Something about expanding the cultural database. She'd filled out forms, signed waivers, and now here she was, standing in what looked like the galaxy's most expensive dentist office. A door panel slid open with a whisper of displaced air. Thyss emerged first, her pale blue-white skin catching the overhead light in a way that made her look carved from ice. The Ziran null form moved with economical precision, her 2 arms hanging loose at her sides, her matte silver eyes fixed on a data slate she carried in one hand. The white lab coat she wore was immaculate, tailored close over deep teal scrubs, and the floating sensor nodes near her shoulders emitted a faint hum that Ray couldn't quite place. Her head remained perfectly still as she read, only her narrow jawline shifting slightly as she processed information. Behind her, Velric glided into view, his long white medical coat sweeping the floor like a ceremonial robe. The Thyrex void analyst stood barely 5 feet tall, his dark charcoal skin absorbing light in a way that made him look like a walking shadow dressed in institutional white. The navy blue accent stripes along his lapels matched the dark tunic visible beneath, and his deep black eyes, those unsettling forward-facing orbs with their faint internal rings, tracked Ray with the sort of focus usually reserved for counting down timers. "Subject is here," Thyss said, not looking up from her slate. Her voice was flat, professional, the kind of tone that suggested she'd rather be cataloguing moss samples. Velric's head inclined forward slightly, his internal eye rings rotating in slow, deliberate circles. "The human." "The human," Thyss confirmed, finally glancing up. Her silver eyes swept over Ray once, then returned to the slate. "Standard assessment. Should take less than a cycle." Ray offered a friendly smile and raised one hand in greeting. "Hi, Ray. Thanks for fitting me in." Neither alien responded immediately. Thys's shoulders tensed just slightly, her dermal plating tightening in a way that would have been invisible to anyone not paying attention. Velric's eye rings rotated faster. "You may follow us," Thyss said, turning on her heel and walking toward the inner corridor without waiting to see if Ray complied. Ray shrugged and followed, her boots clicking against the polished floor. As they passed through the atrium, she noticed a few of the background aliens, a chitinous-limbed researcher in muted brown, a sleek reptilian figure with deep grey-green scales pause in their tasks to watch. One of them, something with smooth slate-blue skin and wide-set eyes, dropped the sample case it was carrying. The case hit the floor with a dull thud, and the alien scrambled to retrieve it, never taking its eyes off Ray. "Popular today," Ray murmured to herself. The corridor leading to the assessment chamber was narrow, lit by recessed floor strips that glowed a cool blue. Thyss walked ahead, her gait smooth and mechanical, while Velric brought up the rear, his coat rustling softly with each step. Ray found herself between them, and something about the configuration felt oddly formal, like an escort, or a containment protocol. The assessment chamber itself was circular, maybe 20 feet across, with walls that curved upward to a domed ceiling. A raised platform occupied the center, smooth, dark, elevated about 2 feet off the ground. Around the perimeter, recessed monitoring equipment blinked with muted amber and blue interface lights, and above, a holographic projector hung like a mechanical eye, its lens pointed downward at the platform. An observation window on the upper level reflected the room below, tinted dark enough that Ray couldn't see if anyone was watching. "Step onto the platform, please," Thyss said, gesturing with one hand toward the raised surface. Her sensor nodes drifted closer to her shoulders, their hum intensifying slightly. Ray complied, stepping up and standing in the center. The surface was cool through her boots, faintly textured for grip. "Do I need to do anything? Hold my breath? Stand on one leg?" "Remain still," Velric said from his position near one of the control stations. His hands emerged from the wide sleeves of his coat, gloved in sterile white, and began adjusting settings on the waist-height console. "The scan will be comprehensive." Thyss moved to the opposite control station, her two arms working in tandem as she activated the holographic projector. A beam of light descended from the ceiling, washing over Ray in a grid pattern that felt warm against her skin. The light crawled from her head to her boots, then back up again, slower this time, more deliberate. "Subject is cooperative," Thyss noted aloud, her tone suggesting she'd expected otherwise. "For now," Velric muttered. Ray tilted her head slightly. "Sorry, what was that?" "Nothing," Velric said quickly, his eye rings spinning. "Please face forward." Ray did, clasping her hands loosely in front of her. The scanning light intensified, and she felt a faint tingling sensation across her shoulders. Above her, the holographic projector began rendering a three-dimensional image, a wireframe outline of her body that rotated slowly in the air. Data streams appeared alongside it, columns of text in a script Ray couldn't read, but the numbers were universal enough. Measurements, ratios, biological metrics. Thyss leaned closer to her console, her head perfectly still as her silver eyes tracked the incoming data. One of her sensor nodes drifted forward, scanning the holographic display from multiple angles. "Initial scan complete. Running baseline analysis." "Molecular composition?" Velric asked, his voice low. "Processing." Thyss tapped a sequence into her console, and the holographic image shifted. Layers of Ray's body peeling away to reveal skeletal structure, musculature, circulatory systems. Standard carbon-based biology, water content at 60%, oxygen-dependent respiration. "Unremarkable," Velric said, though his eye rings hadn't stopped rotating. "Extremely," Thyss agreed. Ray rocked back on her heels slightly, then caught herself and stilled. The movement was subtle, barely noticeable, but both aliens froze. Thyss's shoulders tensed, her dermal plating tightening visibly beneath her lab coat. Velric's head inclined further forward, his muscles going rigid beneath the white medical coat. "Did you require something?" Thyss asked carefully. "No, I'm good," Ray said. "Just standing here, as instructed." "Yes," Velric said slowly. "Standing, perfectly still, as predators do." Ray blinked. "What?" "Nothing," Thyss interjected, shooting Velric a look. Her silver eyes narrowed fractionally. "Continue the scan. Skeletal density analysis." The holographic display zoomed in on Ray's skeletal structure, highlighting bone composition and density readings. Numbers populated the air in glowing text, and Thyss's hand, holding a stylus she'd pulled from her coat pocket, froze midway to the console. "This cannot be correct," she said. Velric abandoned his station and crossed to Thyss's side, his coat trailing behind him. He leaned in, his black eyes scanning the data, his internal rings rotating so fast they became a blur. "Recalibrate the scan." "I already did," Thyss said flatly. "Twice." Ray craned her neck to look at the display, though the alien text meant nothing to her. "Everything okay?" "Your skeletal density," Thyss said, her voice carefully neutral, "is reading at a level consistent with apex load-bearing structures." "Is that bad?" Ray asked. "It means your bones could withstand significant impact force," Velric said, his tone funereal. "Repeated impact force. As if your species evolved to endure physical trauma." Ray laughed. "Well, I mean, I broke my leg once playing soccer, healed up fine though." Both aliens turned to stare at her. "You broke a primary structural limb," Thyss said slowly. and it regenerated. I wouldn't say regenerated, Ray said. More like healed, with a cast. Took about 6 weeks. Velric's eye rings stopped rotating entirely. 6 weeks, give or take. Thyss returned her attention to the console, tapping in a new command sequence. The holographic display shifted again, this time highlighting Ray's muscular system. Red and blue fibers intertwined in complex patterns, and the accompanying data made Thyss's dermal plating tighten even further. Muscle composition, Thyss read aloud, shows dual fiber structure. Fast twitch and slow twitch in integrated arrays. Meaning? Ray asked. Meaning, Velric said, his voice hollow. Your species is built for both explosive power and sustained endurance, simultaneously. Ray shrugged, the movement causing her leather jacket to shift slightly. I guess? I go to the gym a few times a week. Nothing crazy. You train for combat, Velric said. It wasn't a question. I mean, I do kickboxing sometimes, Ray admitted. But that's just for fun. Cardio, you know? Thyss and Velric exchanged a look. It was brief, but loaded with the kind of silent communication that comes from working together too long. Thyss's shoulders were fully tensed now, her posture rigid despite her outward calm. Velric's hands had disappeared back into his sleeves, but Ray could see the fabric trembling slightly. Continue scan, Thyss said. Cardiovascular and respiratory analysis. The holographic display expanded, showing Ray's heart and lungs in pulsing detail. The heart beat steadily, a rhythmic contraction that pushed blood through an intricate network of vessels. The lungs expanded and contracted with mechanical efficiency, processing oxygen with what the readout described as optimal capacity. Resting heart rate, Thyss said, her voice barely above a whisper, is 60 beats per minute. That's normal, right? Ray asked. For a persistence hunter, Velric said. Species that track prey over extended distances, wearing them down through relentless pursuit until the target collapses from exhaustion. Ray frowned. That's really specific. Your lung capacity, Thyss continued, ignoring the comment, indicates you can sustain aerobic activity for extended periods. Your body is designed to outlast other organisms. I did run a half marathon last year, Ray offered. It wasn't that bad, honestly. Velric made a sound that might have been a whimper if it had come from a species with vocal cords designed for such things. Instead, it was a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the chamber. Thyss tapped another command, and the holographic display pulled back to show Ray's full body again. This time, new data overlays appeared: thermal regulation, sweat gland distribution, metabolic efficiency. Each metric that populated the display seemed to make Thyss's posture more rigid, her silver eyes wider. Thermoregulation through liquid secretion, Thyss said. Your species cools itself by expelling water through dermal pores. Sweating, yeah, Ray said. Is that weird? It is, Velric said. The most efficient biological cooling system we have encountered. You can operate in extreme heat without overheating. You can pursue prey through environments that would kill them from thermal stress. Okay, now you're just making stuff up, Ray said, laughing. I'm not pursuing anyone. Not yet, Velric muttered. Thyss shot him another look, then returned to her console. Her fingers moved quickly now, pulling up additional scans, cross-referencing data against what Ray assumed was some kind of universal biological database. The holographic display split into multiple panels, each showing different aspects of human physiology, brain structure, sensory organs, nervous system response times. Binocular vision, Thyss said, her voice taking on a clinical detachment that Ray recognized as someone trying very hard not to panic. Forward-facing eyes with overlapping fields of view. Depth perception optimized for tracking moving targets. Pattern recognition capability, Velric added, reading from his own console, exceeds predictive modeling. You can anticipate movement before it occurs. I mean, if someone's about to throw a ball, sure, Ray said. That's just reflexes. Reflexes, Thyss repeated. She pulled up another data panel. Nervous system response time. 150 milliseconds from stimulus to reaction. Ray had no frame of reference for whether that was good or bad, but the way Velric's eye rings started rotating again suggested it was probably bad. "Run the predator classification protocol," Velric said quietly. "I am running it," Thyss replied, her tone sharp. "It takes time." "What's a predator classification protocol?" Ray asked. Both aliens ignored her. The holographic display above Ray's head began cycling through images, abstract shapes, moving patterns, scenarios rendered in simple geometry. Ray watched them, her eyes tracking the movements without conscious thought. A shape darted left, her gaze followed. A pattern repeated. She anticipated the next iteration. A target appeared. She fixated on it. The display stopped. New text appeared in glowing letters above Ray's head, large enough that even she could read the universal script. "Apex Predator." The chamber went silent. Thyss's dermal plating was so tight now that her skin looked almost translucent. Velric's entire body had gone rigid, his hands frozen halfway to his console. Even the ambient hum of the monitoring equipment seemed muted, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Ray looked up at the floating text, then back at the two aliens. "Is that good?" Neither of them answered. From somewhere above, in the observation corridor, Ray heard the faint sound of footsteps retreating quickly. Velric's eye rings rotated once, slowly, then stopped. His head tilted slightly, his gaze fixed on Ray, with the intensity of someone watching a live explosive. "We need to run additional tests." "Agreed," Thyss said, her voice barely audible. Ray glanced between them, noting the tension in their postures, the way they'd both taken a half-step back from their consoles. "Are you guys okay?" "Fine," Thyss said quickly. "Perfectly fine. Please remain on the platform." "Sure," Ray said, clasping her hands again. "Take your time." Velric leaned close to Thyss, his voice dropping to a whisper that Ray's ears, those forward-facing, sound-triangulating, predator-grade ears, picked up anyway. "If the classification is accurate." "It is," Thyss whispered back. "The protocol does not make mistakes." "Then we are standing," Velric said slowly, "in a room with an apex predator from a death world. I am aware. And she is smiling at us." Thyss glanced at Ray, who was indeed smiling pleasantly, waiting for further instructions. "Yes." "Why is she smiling?" "I do not know," Thyss said, her shoulders trembling now despite her rigid control. "And that terrifies me." Thyss straightened her lab coat with deliberate care, her two arms moving in perfect synchronization as she smoothed the white fabric over her teal scrubs. Her matte silver eyes remained locked on Ray, who stood patiently on the platform, hands still clasped, expression still friendly, too friendly. The kind of friendly that came naturally to something that had never needed to fear anything else. "We will now conduct behavioral analysis," Thyss announced, her voice steady despite the way her dermal plating continued to tighten beneath her skin. "Sure thing," Ray said, shifting her weight to one leg in a casual stance that made Velric's eye rings spin faster. "She is repositioning," Velric murmured from his console, his gloved hands hovering over the controls like he was afraid to touch them, adjusting balance for rapid movement. "She is standing comfortably," Thyss corrected, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Ray stretched her arms overhead, rolling her shoulders with an audible pop that echoed through the chamber. Both aliens flinched. The movement was innocuous, just working out the stiffness from standing still, but through the lens of the data now displayed in glowing panels around her holographic image, it looked like a combat warm-up. Muscle groups activating. Joint mobility check. Preparation for explosive action. "Why did you do that?" Velric asked, his voice tight. Ray lowered her arms, looking confused. "Do what?" Velric gestured vaguely at his own shoulders, his hands emerging briefly from his sleeves before retreating again. "The postural adjustment, with auditory confirmation." "You mean stretching?" Ray asked. "I've been standing here for like 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Thyss repeated, pulling up another data panel. "Your species considers 20 minutes of static positioning uncomfortable." "I mean, yeah," Ray said. "Don't you?" "We rest every 8 minutes during sustained activity," Thyss said. 20 minutes of continuous stillness would cause most species significant strain. But not yours, Velric added darkly. Ray laughed, the sound bright and genuine. Both aliens went rigid. I guess I'm just used to it. I had a job once where I was on my feet for 12-hour shifts. The chamber went silent again. Somewhere in the adjacent laboratory, visible through the transparent partition, a chitinous-limbed researcher in muted brown dropped an entire tray of sample containers. The crash was muffled but distinct, followed by the rapid clicking of mandibles that suggested profound distress. 12 hours, Thyss said slowly. Continuous. Well, we got breaks, Ray clarified. But yeah, mostly standing and walking. Velric's head inclined forward so far that his elongated skull nearly touched the console. His eye rings had stopped rotating, locked in place as his entire body tensed. Persistence hunting. She is describing persistence hunting. I was a waitress, Ray said flatly. A what? Thyss asked. I served food to people, carried plates, took orders, walked between tables. Ray mimed the motion of balancing something on one hand. Not exactly thrilling, but it paid the bills. The holographic display helpfully annotated her gesture, tracking the precise muscle control required to balance an object on an elevated limb while in motion. The data suggested a level of coordination consistent with tool use, projectile deployment, and weapon handling. Thyss made a notation on her console, her movement stiff. Your species uses coordinated limb control to manipulate objects while mobile. I mean, yes, Ray said, now thoroughly confused by the line of questioning. Don't you? Not with that degree of precision, Thyss admitted. Our motor control requires stationary positioning for fine manipulation. Huh? Ray said. She reached down and plucked a small maintenance tool from a nearby equipment tray, something roughly the size and weight of a pen, and tossed it lightly to her other hand. The motion was casual, thoughtless, the kind of idle fidgeting people do when they're bored. Velric made that low humming sound again. The holographic display tracked the throw with clinical precision, object weight, trajectory calculation, hand-eye coordination, catching without visual confirmation. The data annotated itself with terms like ranged capability and projectile accuracy and threat deployment potential. Please do not do that again, Thyss said, her voice carefully controlled. Ray set the tool back down. Sorry, fidgety. Fidgety, Velric repeated, the word sounding like a funeral dirge in his resonant voice. She describes enhanced motor control as a nervous habit. Thyss pulled up a new screen, this one showing a timeline. Let us review the assessment from the beginning. She tapped a command, and the holographic display rewound, showing Ray's entrance into the chamber. You walked here from the reception atrium. Right, Ray confirmed. You tracked 3 separate individuals during your approach. Thyss highlighted the moment in the replay where Ray's gaze had swept across the atrium. Your eyes fixated on each for 0.7 seconds. Threat assessment interval. I was just looking around, Ray protested. You identified movement vectors and potential obstacles without conscious processing, Velric said, pulling up his own data. When the researcher dropped the sample case, you oriented toward the sound in 0.2 seconds, faster than their own startle reflex. Ray opened her mouth, then closed it. I have good hearing? Exceptional hearing, Thyss corrected. She pulled up an audio analysis chart. Your species can triangulate sound sources in 3-dimensional space. You can track prey by noise alone. Okay, can we stop calling everything prey? Ray said, her tone finally showing a hint of frustration. I'm not hunting anyone. Not intentionally, Velric said. But your biology does not require intention. You are a pursuit predator at rest. Every system in your body exists to chase, capture, and outlast other living things. Ray stared at him. That's the most metal thing anyone's ever said about me, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Thyss brought up another panel, this one showing comparative data. Most species in the galactic community evolved from prey, stock, or environmental specialists. We developed intelligence as a survival mechanism against natural threats. Your species, she paused, her silver eyes finding Ray's face. Your species was the natural threat. We are the thing others evolved to escape, Velric added quietly. Ray processed this for a moment, then shrugged. I mean, humans did hunt a lot back in the day. But we're past that now. We have grocery stores and stuff. You have industrialized your predation, Thyss said. That is somehow worse. A long silence stretched through the chamber. Ray looked between the two aliens, noting their rigid postures, their careful distance, the way they both kept their hands visible and non-threatening. It finally clicked. Wait, Ray said slowly. Are you guys scared of me? We are exercising appropriate caution, Thyss said. We are terrified, Velric corrected. Thyss shot him a sharp look, but didn't contradict him. Ray felt something twist in her chest. She'd come here as a volunteer, a gesture of goodwill, a way to help the interspecies community understand humans better. And instead she'd apparently traumatized two researchers with her bone density. I'm not going to hurt anyone. We know, Thyss said, though her shoulders remained tense. Logically, we know. But your classification, the apex predator thing, Ray finished. Yes. Ray stepped down from the platform, the movement smooth and controlled. Both aliens took an involuntary step back. She raised her hands, palms out, the universal gesture of non-aggression. Look, I get it. The data says scary things, but I'm just a person. I work in an office. I like bad movies. I can't cook to save my life. I'm not some kind of monster. Velric's eye rings rotated slowly. That is precisely what makes you so unsettling. You are an apex predator that does not recognize itself as such. You have divorced your biology from your behavior, but the capability remains. We have been reviewing the footage, Thyss said, pulling up another screen. Everything you have done since arriving has been friendly, cooperative and non-threatening, and yet. The screen showed a compilation, Ray walking with balanced precision, her gaze tracking movement, her posture relaxed but ready, Ray stretching, her muscles flexing beneath her jacket, Ray catching the tool, her reflexes faster than conscious thought. Each moment, harmless in isolation, formed a pattern when viewed together. And yet, Ray repeated softly. And yet we cannot stop calculating threat potential, Thyss finished. It is involuntary. Your presence triggers every survival instinct we possess. Ray looked at the data surrounding her, the clinical assessment of her species as walking nightmares wrapped in friendly packaging. She thought about the half-marathon, the 12-hour shifts, the time she'd hiked 15 miles in summer heat because she'd missed the trail marker, the casual way she'd catch falling objects without thinking. Huh, Ray said. That's actually kind of cool. Both aliens stared at her. You think your threat classification is cool, Velric said, his tone hovering somewhere between disbelief and resignation. Ray grinned. I mean, when you put it like that. Yeah, kind of. Thyss and Velric exchanged another look. This one lasted longer, weighted with the kind of communication that comes from shared trauma. Finally, Thyss turned back to her console and began entering commands with quick, decisive movements. Assessment complete, she announced. All data has been logged and filed. All ready? Ray asked. We have everything we need, Velric said, moving to open the chamber door with more speed than he'd shown during the entire assessment. Thank you for your participation. Ray grabbed her jacket from where she draped it over the platform edge and shrugged it on. That's it? Don't you need to explain the results or anything? We will forward a comprehensive report, Thyss said, ushering Ray toward the door with careful gestures that kept a precise 3 feet of distance at all times. Very comprehensive, extremely detailed, with citations, Velric added, holding the door open and pressing himself against the wall to maximize the space Ray had to pass through. Ray paused at the threshold, looking back at the two researchers. They stood side by side, their postures rigid, their expressions carefully neutral. You know, this was actually pretty interesting. Maybe I could come back sometime, answer more questions. The color drained from Thyss's already pale blue-white skin. Velric's eye rings stopped rotating entirely. We will contact you, Thyss said quickly. If necessary. It will not be necessary, Velric said. But we will contact you, Thyss repeated, shooting Velric another look. Eventually. Ray shrugged and headed back down the corridor, her boots clicking against the polished floor. Behind her, she heard the chamber door slide shut with what sounded like unnecessary force. In the assessment chamber, Thyss and Velric stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Thyss moved to her console and pulled up the final report screen. Her fingers hovered over the classification field. "How do we file this?" she asked. Velric joined her, his black eyes scanning the data one last time. The holographic display still showed Ray's image, still surrounded by metrics that painted a picture of efficient, terrifying biological machinery wrapped in a leather jacket and a friendly smile. "Create a new category," Velric said quietly. "Above standard threat classifications." Thyss nodded and began typing. The words appeared on screen in crisp, glowing text. Species, human. Classification, apex predator. Threat level, catastrophic, non-hostile. Recommendation, maintain diplomatic relations, do not provoke, avoid extended contact. Notes, subject unaware of own threat potential. This somehow makes it worse. Thyss saved the file and stepped back from the console. Through the observation window they could see Ray in the reception atrium below, waving cheerfully at a group of background researchers who immediately scattered in different directions. "She is going to the Commerce District next," Velric said, pulling up Ray's itinerary, "to purchase recreational items." "Recreational," Thyss repeated. She listed her interests as extreme sports and competitive games. They watched Ray disappear through the atrium doors, still smiling, still completely oblivious to the wake of existential dread she left behind. "We are forwarding this file to every facility in the sector," Thyss said. "Agreed," Velric said. In the reception atrium, a maintenance worker began cleaning up the scattered sample containers. Another began drafting a proposal for reinforced observation windows. And in the database, Ray's file was tagged with a single additional note that would follow her species forever.